Does bad luck mean I'm a bad person? This might be a question you've been wondering. Maybe somebody suggested that to you. Maybe somebody said to you, hey, all this bad stuff keeps happening to you. Maybe it's because of sin in your life. Maybe you're a bad person. What are you doing in secret? What are you doing behind closed doors? That's a good question. We see in Luke chapter 1, there was a couple named Zechariah and Elizabeth, and it says in verse 6, they were both righteous before God, walking blamelessly in all the commandments and statutes of the Lord. But look what it says in verse 7. But they had no child because Elizabeth was barren and both were advanced in years. Now back then that was a source of great pain and shame, and a lot of people looked at Elizabeth and Zechariah and said, you must be doing something wrong that God isn't blessing you with kids. But again, look at what it says in verse 6. The author makes it pretty clear. They were both righteous before God, and yet up to this point, they didn't have any kids. So here's the answer. Does bad luck mean I'm a bad person? No. Elizabeth and Zechariah were righteous, and they were old and without kids at this point in the story. Now you can read the story and see that God did eventually bless them with kids, but I think the point is still clear. We see it in another place. The Apostle Paul says, to keep me from becoming conceited because of these revelations that God was giving him, he says, a thorn was given in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. Now, we don't know what this thorn in the flesh was. Maybe it was a physical illness. Maybe it was a mental illness. Who knows what it was? But he had a thorn in the flesh, and it says in verse 8, 3 times I pleaded with God about this, that it should leave me. So Paul is praying, God, I love you. I'm serving you. I'm a good person. Take this thing away from me. But look at the answer he got in verse 9. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, Paul says, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Look at what happens. Paul wanted this thorn to be taken away. He was a good person. He really prayed for it. And God's answer was, nope, I'm not going to take it away from you. I'm not going to take this thorn away. I have a reason for it. So we see Paul was a good guy with bad luck. He had this thorn in the flesh, but God used it to teach him about grace. Bad luck did not mean he was a bad person. And here's really the bottom line. Sometimes bad stuff just happens to good people. Sometimes you don't get the job you were hoping to get. Sometimes you get sick or a loved one gets sick. Sometimes that stuff happens and it's unrelated to your sin. It's unrelated to whether you're a good person or a bad person. Maybe God's teaching you a lesson. Maybe he wants to show you his power or his grace. Who knows? Or maybe it's just bad stuff that's happening in your life. Don't overanalyze it all the time. Now, that's not to say that maybe that some sin in your life is reaping some bad consequences. Certainly that can be true, and that'll be a subject of a future video. But for now, you just need to know that bad luck does not always mean you're a bad person. And maybe you can end by asking this question of yourself. Do I trust God no matter what? Even when bad stuff is happening, do I still trust in God?